Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Damon Burton. Hi, Damon.
What's up, Eddie? Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. I'm so excited about our topic today because we're going to talk about SEO, but from a different angle, right? We're going to talk about it from your perspective, and what you have done is incredible. So first of all, you started your company, SEO National, in 2007, just before the recession.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, it's kind of like, starting a business during the pandemic, right? Depends what it is. I mean, it's, but I think it's like, when you do it during times like that, it's honestly, people are going to get through tough times if they actually promote, right? And you're there to help them promote and do better. So we're going to talk about that and how was your experience about that. But now you've been doing it for, what is it, like almost 2 decades, right?
Pretty close.
Yeah, and you were able, your website actually outranked $1 billion company, right, on Google?
Yeah, now I've done it a couple times. There's one fun story we'll get into, but I've done it a few times now, yeah.
Good. And then you went, basically, since you started your company, you've been helping companies do their SEO, do marketing, and I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about how did you get started? Why did you choose this field? And walk us through the timeline until today.
Yeah, so this will be fun. I'll go over a couple things and then we can go deeper, and then we'll get to kind of talking about the most valuable part of the journey for your audience, which is the SOPs kind of moment on my timeline. So I got into it. My background was originally web design, and I was kind of like everybody else doing things on the side, at least how a lot of us entrepreneurs start. And where I kind of had my first fork in the road to make a decision on entrepreneurship was the company I was working for my day job got shut down. And so I had to make a decision to see if they were able to recover, if I still had a job, or if I go find another job, or if I bet on myself and I focused my time on the side clients that I had. So I did the math, and my wife and I, we've been together about 20 years. And at the time, she had a job and we didn't have kids yet. So I just kind of did the math of, how things would balance out financially. And we'd still have enough that I could pay the bills. We'd lose the disposable income, but that seemed like a pretty safe bet that I could take at that time. And so I took the bet. I bet on myself, took option number 3, and I freed up. The nice thing in doing that, I lost half my income because the day job was half my income and the side hustle was half my income. But the day job was 80% of my time. So I was able to free up a big portion of my time. And then by having that time available, and I could commit to my side hustle clients who are now my full-time clients, I was able to recover that income in just a couple months. So that's kind of how the journey started. Now, the way it evolved into an SEO agency is because I was originally designed. I actually had one of my clients say, "What do you know about Google?" And I said, "I know enough that I think I can help you, but I don't know enough that I feel comfortable charging you. But I also don't want to work for free. So let's work something out." And so what we proposed, which is a great thing for newer entrepreneurs to listen to, this is a great way where you can kind of pre-frame some of your first sales. And so what I said to them is I said, how about we agree upon these goals. I charge you nothing unless we hit them. And then if we hit those goals, you pay me retroactively and we start a retainer. So now your client has nothing to risk. And then you're also incentivized to win. So we hit those goals, started a retainer, and then I just started rolling that out to some of my other design clients. And pretty early on, I said, I never wanted to be an agency that offered it all. And so after a couple wins with SEO, I decided to stick to SEO and see if that was my thing. And 17 years later, it ended up being my thing. So that's kind of the abbreviated version.
Good. I like it. I like that story. So give us a crash course in SEO.
It's a lot Conceptually, it's a lot simpler than most people think. So usually when you hear the word SEO, you think it's like a billion things and there is a lot that goes into it, but you can really simplify it to just three areas of fulfillment. And so the first area is how good or bad is your website built? Does it load quickly? Is it mobile friendly? Is it easy to use? And then the second category is your content. You can only show up on Google for what Google can read. So do you clearly communicate what your product is, what your service is, and why you're better than the competition? What are your value propositions? And then the last category is external credibility. So do other people talk about you? Do they link to your website? This is why reviews are important. And so when you simplify things, the SEO to those three scopes, most of your visibility comes from the latter two. So, you do the first one, build a nice website, and then you focus on content credibility. And over the years, that's the one thing where I've seen other SEOs kind of drop the ball or where their clients get impacted is other companies A don't build SOPs, which we'll talk about, but B is they get caught up in shortcuts and they get into gamifying SEO instead of sticking to the fundamentals and going for what's more sustainable long term.
Right. I agree. So the SOPs you were talking about, you told me that just before we were talking a little bit before the show, is that the best thing you've done for the company. I mean, I guess there are a lot of probably other things you have done that are the best, but one of the best things that you have done, or that are good, not the best, but one of the best things that you have done was actually to standardize your company. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I had some processes, but I'm sure like a lot of us, some were in my head, some were on a spreadsheet, and some were on a document over there. And what happened was I went to a meeting with a VC company. I had a friend invite me who was getting funding for his company. And he said, why don't you just come join the conversation, hear what they have to say? And what I learned from that meeting was that buyers, if you ever get to the point where you want to sell, buyers want two things. And so the first thing is they want to know where they want to take the keys and run, right? And so you have to have SOPs because they just want to take over. And the second thing is where is the fire? Where are the sales? And they just want to go pour more fuel on the fire. And so when I left that meeting, I realized I have SOPs, but they're not consolidated to a single consistent platform. And so after that is when I worked on creating the processes. And when I was doing it, I didn't want to do it halfway. I didn't want to, just check off a box in my head and say good enough and then, expose gaps in the documentation over time. And so I really took my time. It took a long time. It took about 2 or 3 hours every other day for about a year. Because if you think about, at least in the industry that I'm in, there's a lot of moving parts and variables. Clients can be in different industries, they can be on different website platforms. And so I can never predict what the exact scenario of what the next client will look like. And so what I had to do is go through and document the black and white stuff, the obvious, very step one, step two, step three things. But then after I was done with that, I had to go back through and go, okay, well, how I can't be present for my team in all decisions. So how do I how do I document the wild cards? And so I can't give the answer, but I can help document my team how they discover the answers on their own. So I went really deep on SOPs, and I think we all hear that SOPs are important, but until you actually implement it, you don't tangibly notice how significant the impact is. So for me, the immediate impact after that was when we had our first opportunity to bid on a $10,000 or higher per month retainer. And I wouldn't have felt comfortable bidding on that because if we got the account and we didn't have SOPs, then we couldn't properly deliver on a project at that scale, which would then long-term affect your reputation. And so that was nice because we ended up getting that contract so we could go in confidently and fulfill on that contract. And then we were able to scale. So we talk
That's
about,
amazing.
yeah, just the pandemic you mentioned, the recession, things like that. How do you maintain quality control at scale and in tricky times like that as well? And it's been SOPs.
Absolutely. So how did the actual SOPs help you in terms of getting the confidence that you can deliver?
Well, when you're doing these bigger contracts, it's either a larger quantity of fulfillment items or more complex fulfillment items. And so or a combination of those. And so that means, you as a leader are usually not doing all the things, or at least you shouldn't be doing all the things. Or if you're still kind of a smaller business and you are doing all the things, at some point, you have no choice other than to start delegating. And so when you delegate, your team is going to be as good or as bad as your documentation. So there became a point where there just wasn't enough Damon to do all the things. And so then that means the team has to do it. And without SOPs, the team can't reproduce. Without good SOPs, the team can't reproduce your historical results. And so it allowed us to maintain those results as we grow, but then also continue to have that confidence to go, look, we're doing well. And if we add more people, we can continue to do well as we add more clients and team members because the SOPs. And so basically, you want your SOPs documented so well that the people you hire only need to A, read, and B, follow directions. And as long as they can read and follow directions and your SOPs are sufficient enough, then you should be able to scale without worrying about quality control.
Absolutely. Now, Damon, you touched on a point that I hear many entrepreneurs bring up in terms of like, there are some things that they claim, or some people claim that cannot be documented, right? Some things that are more of an art than a skill, or more than an art than a technique, or a technology that you can document. How can I document all scenarios? I'm just bringing you some objections that I get, and I definitely work my clients through that. And I do believe that, you can document, but what's your take on it? Like, especially in something like SEO, that there can be variables, as you mentioned, something that people have to think about and not necessarily take an instruction or direction. How do you handle that?
It's a good question. And, I had that belief, at least to some extent, for quite a while. And through continued growth and forced pain points and growing pains, you have to ask yourself, there has to be a way. And so then as you start to explore that, you start to realize, kind of like we touched on, where I still agree that you probably can't document very clearly all the things in a step one, step two, step three, but I do believe you can document pretty much everything dynamically. So what I mean is you probably can't quite literally just put follow step one, follow step two, follow step three in a lot of scenarios. But what you can do for your team is go, look, here's what the finish line looks like. And so from there, reverse engineer where we're at. And so then you educate them on how to find this missing steps in between. So you can't document what those steps are, but you can document how your team can find them. And what I found when I first had that doubt, and I just had no other choice but to see if I could figure it out, is that the more that you explore documenting these document things and you find a solution, then the more that it opens you up to going, oh, okay, now I know how to do that for the next dynamic situation. And so I can relate to the people and the business owners that say it's not possible, but I would say to look at it from the finish line and reverse engineer it and figure out how close you can get. And even if you don't get it right the first time, usually what happens is it exposes one thing. You go, oh, okay, well, there's one of the 5 steps. And so maybe I can do this. And so it starts to open up the conversation, and it helps kind of rewire your brain to figure out how you can document things. And as long as you acknowledge it's not going to be 1, 2, 3, and it's going to be more dynamic, you usually can end up finding a way.
I agree. I mean, we call it like best practices, right? So or recommendations, right? Or how do you actually, or approaches, right? Because maybe you can't cover all the scenarios, but you can cover how do you actually approach that scenario, right? What are the tools that you use, or what are the most common? It also forces you to think about what are the most common way. What is the most common, basically, right? What happens the most? What are the things that you encounter the most, or that you run into, then you need to find a solution to. And if you actually show your thought process throughout, then others can duplicate it and handle similar situations when they come up.
Yeah. You bring up a good point about showing the average. And so a lot of times what you can do is document the average. And then the way that we document things is we mostly document things in text. And a lot of people like to document things in video. And so for me, we've started doing a hybrid. So the reason why we mostly do it in text is because let's say you have like a 20-minute video that you've created for documentation. Well, if anything changes, now you have to re-record that video, or at least edit it. And, then it kind of is inconsistent. But when it's in text, it's really easy to change because you can just go change the one thing. But, to your point, a lot of times things are more personal, or we talk about the art of things. And so sometimes when you see people paint the picture, then there's value in that. So we've started doing a hybrid where we document everything in text, and then at the end we go, here's not a full video, but here's an abbreviated video showing you the art, we'll call it the artistic part. And so that way because everybody learns kind of differently. Some people can read and some people need to see visually. And so when you do a hybrid documentation, that's kind of been the next layer. There's always, in my mind, when we finish it, we go back and we go, how can we make it better? How can we make it better? And so that's kind of our next iteration of documentation, is now making a hybrid approach.
Absolutely. I'm with you. It's when we do videos, we try to keep it very short. So let's say we record, we extract the text out of it, like the knowledge, right? We write it. And then maybe we snip like a smaller, like a minute to 5-minute videos that actually cannot be conveyed in writing, right? I mean, it's like maybe the owner of that process explaining things that it's good to hear in their own voice, in their own words, and actually hear it. So
Yeah.
I think the hybrid approach is very important. And also, when you document, and tell me if you've done that as well, when you document something, it's really important to actually document the why behind it. What are the elements that exist in what you are doing that will actually lead to the same result over and over, although maybe you are doing different things, right? In terms of, let's say we're documenting customer service processes, right? And if you actually insert your core values behind it, is that you always listen to the customer. You try to figure out what the problem is. You come up with some solution. If you have the steps to do that, I mean, each customer is going to be different, and they're going to come up with different scenarios that you'll have to handle. But if your approach is similar in terms of following the process, and you understand why you're doing each step, then you will be able to solve those problems.
Yeah, I totally agree. And interestingly enough, the why has been one of those new things, where I mentioned we go back and we go, how do we make this better? Why is something we didn't fully document. It was implied before, but it wasn't clearly documented until probably about 2 years ago. And, I can give you an example for us as an agency, because the way we have our company divided into departments is a client's campaign starts with research. And so we have to go, okay, how do we find this customer's money? Who are their avatars? Where are their customers? What do they do online? How do we get in front of those people? And then the research team then passes those results to the copywriting team. And so then the copywriting team writes the content around those topics. And so, there's more departments, but we'll just kind of go with those two for this example. And so what we realized is what was implied was the research team knew our goal was to drive more visibility for the customer, and so they make more money. But where we missed the why was they didn't know that they would look at research, and research would say these words are searched a lot. And so they would look at volume. But we don't necessarily need high volume. We need good buyer intent. And so a lot of times there's a difference between high search volume, but then low search volume with high buyer intent. So like an example is, do we want to show up number one for something that gets 10,000 searches per month, but isn't our ideal buying avatar? Or do we want to show up for something that only gets 10 searches a month, but is very specific and 9 out of 10 people are going to buy? So do we want 1 out of 10,000 or 9 out of 10? And so we realized we need to document the why, that the keyword research shouldn't just be what is the broadest net that gets the most searches. We need to fine tune these targets and narrow the why down. And our why in the research is not search volume, but client accuracy. And so that could have been applied, was implied and seemed like a no-brainer, but then you realize that everybody has a different view coming in, has different experience. And so we had to add that why.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a key ingredient, in my opinion. Okay, good. And now if you had to give an advice to the entrepreneurs that are listening to us right now and kind of like on the fence, should I document my processes or should I not? I mean, obviously you're going to say you should,
Yeah.
but give them like why, like in a summary, like what is the biggest impact that it had on your company by having those well-documented processes?
Well, for me personally, it was maintaining quality control at scale. So, which leads into the why that that I would give most entrepreneurs is at some point you are going to have to document your processes. It's unavoidable, right? Even if you're not doing it now, you know in the back of your mind that you probably need to get to it. And the reality is you're not going to have more time later, you're going to have less time. And so, do you want to document it now while you have some time, or do you want to document it in the future while you have little to no time? And so, if you defer it, it's going to be more painful, and your documentation is probably going to be less accurate because you're going to be in a struggle. So, it's at the end of the day, it's pretty much unavoidable for any business that wants to scale beyond a solopreneur.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Damon, another question is like, how do you make those processes being followed by all?
How do you ensure your team is doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Every business is different, so it's going to depend on what your fulfillment is and your outcome. If I had to kind of simplify every business, it'd probably be based on KPIs. And so you have to create your documentation and then associate that documentation to either team members or departments. And then whoever you associate that to, you have to give KPIs to. And so that way, you as a business owner shouldn't be babysitting everything and should be micromanaging, but you should have some high level view to say, okay, are we continually moving in the right direction? And the only way to do that is through some sort of simplified KPIs.
I agree. That is very true. No, when we document, this is one of the things that we do is we assign KPIs to each process so it can be monitored, because otherwise, how would you know that A, the process is working, and B, if you are doing process improvement, how do you know that it actually worked correctly?
Yeah.
So you have to measure it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. Well, Damon, it's been a pleasure talking to you. This is like a great conversation. You're definitely knowledgeable, and I know you're very knowledgeable in your own field of SEO. If our listeners would like to get a hold of you, find out more about your company and how you can help them be more visible or get the results that they want online, how did they get a hold of you?
Yeah, really simple, damonburton.com. And on there's probably two best options. One is if you're new to SEO and you want to learn more, I have a free book on there that you can download. And then if you are familiar with the power of SEO and you want to see if we're a fit, then there's an intake form that sees if we are a good fit for each other.
Fantastic. And I'm going to include all of those in the show notes so people can easily go to your website. And I highly recommend to download that book and read it and reach out via the intake form to see if it's a good fit. So great. Well, Damon, thank you again for being a guest on this podcast.
Yeah, great topics. Love to chat. Thanks, Adi.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Systems Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.